Okay, this is a discussion of a theory that is not normally understood to be holographic, namely Bergson's. I'm going to try to be as succinct as possible in the key concepts. Henry Bergson, in my opinion, the greatest philosopher to walk this realm. In general, his philosophy, the critical, essential elements thereof, is simply not understood. One can take an entry like this in Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and you're simply not going to see the elements discussed that we're about to talk about here. He gave us the solution to the famous hard problem of consciousness. Also, he gave us the only concrete alternative to the computer model of mind. This is a brief look at the essentials. So, let's go. In Matter and Memory, 1896, Chapter 1, Bergson is considering this problem. How do we account for our image of the external world? That is, our image of stirring the coffee, the kinesthetic image, the visual image, the acoustic image. In other words, how do we account for our experience? Equivalently, for our sentience. For undoubtedly, that image of the external world of the coffee being stirred is our sentience. If it is not, I do not know what it is. Why is this a problem? Because there's nothing in the brain that remotely looks like the swirling coffee and stirring spoon. There are only neurochemical flows, neural nets firing in the current parlance. In other words, there's no photograph of the coffee being stirred in the brain. And so we come to a key passage of Bergson. He says, but is it not obvious that the photograph, if photograph there be, is already taken, already developed in the very heart of things and at all points in space? No metaphysics, no physics can escape this conclusion. Build up the universe with atoms. Each of them is subject to the action, variable in quantity and quality according to the distance exerted on it by all material atoms. Bring in Faraday's centers of force. The lines of force emitted in every direction from every center bring to bear upon each the influence of the whole material world. Call up the Leibnizian monads. Each is the mirror of the universe. So nearly 50 years before Gabor's 1947 discovery of holography, 80 years before David Bohm and his generalization to the whole material field, that is, the universe is a holographic field, Bergson was arguing that we are embedded within a holographic field. The quote, the photograph, already taken, already developed in the very heart of things and at all points in space. We need to take a quick look at holography. So, holography, the essential elements, a laser, a half mirror, a hologram plate or photographic emulsion plate, and object, or objects of which are going to make a hologram, in this case, the pyramid and the ball. What we're going to do is send a wave from the laser, a coherent wave of a single frequency, if possible, toward the hologram plate. We'll call it frequency 1. So that beams through the half mirror, strikes the plate, but of course another portion is beamed off the half mirror, strikes the objects. Therefore it's modulated by the object's form, but it reflects back to the hologram plate. Now it's called the object wave. And in essence, then the hologram is simply the record of the interference pattern formed by the two waves. Now, holographic reconstruction. How do we get that image back? Well, we're going to use a reconstructive wave of the same frequency as the original reference wave, frequency 1. We'll beam it through the plate. It'll be diffracted in the three different directions shown, with the one portion rising up toward the eye of the viewer. That portion of the wave is specific to the original source of that wave, namely the pyramid and ball. So the source of the original object wave is specified to the viewer. Holographic reconstruction. We can modulate the reconstructive wave. For example, we could store multiple wavefronts from different objects on that hologram plate. Say with frequency 2, different reference wave, we have a wine glass, and paired with frequency 3, we have a cup. If we modulate the reconstructive wave from frequency 1, say to frequency 2, we'll specify the image of the wine glass. If we modulate to frequency 3, we specify the cup. Modulating back to frequency 1 again, the pyramid ball. So that's modulating the reconstructive wave. Now, properties of that hologram. Each point of the object, say on a little pyramid on the second picture there, can be considered a bit giving rise to a little spherical wave, and the little spherical wave covers the entire plate. It would look something like this as an interference pattern, not really an interference pattern yet from a single point. Multiple points on that plate would now look like an interference pattern with an unrecognizable pyramid, shall we say, encoded therein. But thus, the information for each point of the object, in this case the pyramid, covers the entire hologram. There's a converse. At each point of the hologram, there's the information for the entire object. Or, equivalently, at any point of the hologram is the information for the whole object. So we could take even a tiny portion of the hologram as such, beam the reconstructive wave through, and still reconstruct and specify the entire original scene, the pyramid and ball, just at a little less fidelity. The grain is not as fine. So we see why Bergson's universe is holographic. How does this explain the image of the coffee cup? Short answer. For Bergson, the brain is in effect a modulated reconstructive wave passing through the holographic field. That is, the holographic field is now the hologram, and the brain, the wave passing through this field, this hologram. And that wave is specific to or specifying a source within the field, an aspect now of the field. By this process, now an image that is an aspect of the field, the coffee cup and stirring spoon. In Bergson's terms, remember we're updating Bergson a bit in the light of the 1947 discovery of holography. He says, and the photograph of the whole is translucent. That is, visualizing that holographic field as a sea of waves. There's nothing but the sea of waves, shall we say. The coffee cup is not discernible within the holographic field. Here there's wanting behind the plate, the black screen on which the image could be shown. Our zones of indetermination, by which he means organisms, play in some sort the part of that screen. They add nothing to what is there. They affect merely this, that the real action passes through, the virtual action remains. What does he mean by real action? Well, he's calling the holographic field the field of real actions. He says, for example, an object acts upon all other objects. It is obliged to transmit the whole of what it receives, to oppose every action with an equal and contrary reaction, to be, in short, merely the road by which pass in every direction the modifications, read waves, of what can be termed the real actions, propagated throughout the immensity of the entire universe. So we can visualize a sea of waves, a massive interference pattern in this quote. So for him, and I'm quoting him, perception is virtual action, or the virtual image of the coffee cup is equally virtual action. The body is selecting from the holographic field of real actions the vast amount of information within that holographic field, that subset on which it can act. So possible bodily action is a selection principle from the holographic field. So this reconstructive wave created by the brain must be understood as a very complex waveform. It is not a simple single frequency, as I've shown here for the ease of initial understanding. What is driving the modulation of the reconstructive wave, we can ask. For Bergson, it would be aspects of the event related to the body's possible action. For the great theorist of perception, J.J. Gibson, the possible action must be related to the invariance laws structuring the event. For example, in the Gibsonian ecological psychology framework, coffee stirring there would have a very rich invariance structure, invariance laws. There'd be velocity flow fields as that coffee swirls, an adiabatic ratio. There's an energy of oscillation ratio to the frequency of oscillation as the spoon goes back and forth. An inertial tensor defined over the wielding of the spoon, a haptic flow field of information as the hand moves, acoustical invariance as the spoon clinks, etc. Texture gradients, ratios, flows, all of this in the Gibsonian framework. For Gibson, the brain is a resonating, that was his metaphor, with forward and backward feedback in the neural networks to this dynamic information. So a very complex wave or waveform being supported by the brain, specific to that event in the external field, the coffee being stirred. Bergson noted that the holographic field can be viewed as having many possible scales of time. You can see it at many possible scales. The brain, via its underlying chemical dynamics, its chemical velocities, the velocity at which chemical flows go through those neurons, is specifying the image at a scale of time. The buzzing fly of our normal scale, for example, that's a normal scale, wings a blur. But it's one particular scale, one possible scale. Increase the chemical velocities, for example, we might transform that buzzing fly to a heron-like fly, barely flapping his wings. Now remember, perception is virtual action. So we are seeing how we, or the body, can act. A heron-like fly, or better as shown there, a motionless fly, implies we could reach out very slowly, very leisurely in this new scale of time and grasp the fly by the wingtip. This is testable, an implication of virtual action. Here's an article on LSD via a certain receptor, 5-HT2A, changes the scale of time. Note we're talking about an inductive action on the 5-HT2A, the 5-hydroxytryptamine receptor 2A. By induction, we're talking about an electronic induction effect acting as a cardinal absorbent in this framework of chemistry, raising the vibration of the entire mass of oscillating neurons. And with this, the fly's wings slow down, the coffee stirring slows down, the conversation you're having, the word conversation slows down. And in general, we're talking about raising the vibration of this oscillating mass is supporting that complex waveform we're talking about, specifying the coffee, the stirring spoon, and the buzzing fly. But the perceived fly is in the past. The perceived position of the spoon is in the past. The light rays entering the retina, the information traveling through the brain, are for an event that happened relatively, shall we say, in the scale of the universe long ago. We are seeing, that is, the brain is specific to a portion of the past transformation of the holographic field. How is this possible? Bergson's conception of time is a critical component in making this entire holographic framework work. We start with the fundamental metaphysic of space and time that seems to us to make this past specification impossible, what I now term the classic metaphysic. What's the classic metaphysic? Well, for Bergson, the classic metaphysic is an abstract space. It's a principle of infinite divisibility, like a mesh, conceptual, that we place beneath the concrete world and draw the meshes ever tighter, ever smaller. We end with a 3D continuum of points, positions. Time is simply the fourth dimension of this abstract space, this series of instants. So if we move that cup from A to B, the motion of the cup from A to B is considered a series of positions. Each position corresponds to an instant of time. Each instant corresponds to a state of the entire universe, a frozen state. Each cube, my universe there, has the logical time extent. If we keep driving the distance between those points down to the extent of has an extent of a mathematical point. That is, it has no time extent whatsoever. Each space, shall we say, falls instantly into non-existence as the next space appears. Each cube of space is utterly homogeneous when taken at this scale. That is, there are no qualities possible at this instantaneous scale of time. To Descartes, Bergson noted, the only way to account for change given this is invoking a God. Somehow you have to have continuous creation, but those cubes are frozen at that mathematical instant, and no way to transition them from space 1 to space 2 to space 3 without invoking some external force that creates cube after cube after cube. All this is, one, an infinite regress. To reconstruct the motion between each pair of points on that trajectory, that red trajectory, we need a new line of points, ad infinitum. Secondly, it's an absurdity. We are trying to explain motion by a series of immobilities. This metaphysic is the foundation, one should realize, though, of mathematics, of physics, and the computational framework, the computer framework. The temporal metaphysic of Bergson, simply motion and time, that is the transformation of events we call time, cannot be treated as a series of states, positions, instants. Motion must be treated as indivisible. It is better conceived as a melody, where each note, instant, or state permeates the next, interpenetrates the next. The current note reflecting the previous notes, or the state of the current note reflecting the entire previous melody. It's an organic continuity. With this, the time transformation of the universal field has its property, a primary memory. The coffee stirring is integrally participating in this dynamic, melodic, indivisible transformation. It is carrying this property of a primary memory. So each instant is not falling, for the classic metaphysic, instantly into the non-existence symbolized by the past, those instantly disappearing cubes. The brain specification can be to a past extent of this transformation within the field. We should note it is a specification of a qualitative field, for the dynamically transforming, melodically, indivisibly holographic field is inherently now qualitative, and the specification can be to buzzing flies given a certain scale of time, heron-like flies, mellow-sounding violins, vibrating reds. Nothing in the image is not qualia. Even the form of the cup is qualia, easily demonstrated. The hard problem is accounting for the image of the external world. And that, of course, is what Bergson has done via the brain as a reconstructive way of passing through this qualitatively changing, dynamic, melodic, holographic field. And finally, our initial perceptual partition as babies is objects and their motions, objects on which we can act, for that's the body's interest. This is refined, becomes the abstract continuum of points, positions, the abstract space. But now, in this framework of Bergson, objects and their motions are changes or transfers of state within the melodic transformation of the whole, like waves in this global transformation of the whole. Let that sink in. The relation of subject and object. So Bergson made this statement, a very Zen koan-like statement when it's early in matter and memory. The relation of subject and object, in the distinction and the union, must be treated in terms of time, not space. What is meant here? Imagine we are raising gradually the energy state of the brain. The buzzing fly of normal scale will transform into a heron-like fly, barely flapping his wings, time scale changing, ultimately a cloud of electrons. Our body too is transforming. It too would ultimately become an electron cloud to us. What we would see then is that there's no true spatial division between our body and the fly. As Bergson noted, the distinct outlines of objects, the fly versus the body versus the cup, these distinct outlines are artificial. Again, they're functions of that initial perceptual partition into objects on which we can act. In reality, there's one field. So now reverse things. Start lowering the energy state. The fly is an electron cloud, transforms to a heron-like fly, barely flapping his wings, to the buzzing fly of normal scale. Our body resumes its normal form. And the spatial unity then between the body and the fly in this is not being broken. But subject is differentiating from object, not in terms of space, but rather, as Bergson noted, in terms of time. This subject-object relation is critical, a critical component in Bergson's unique panpsychism. Focus for a second on this koan from the Zen master Basui. Who is it that sees? This koan, which one concentrates, meditates on in Zen, is going to be relevant here in Bergson's unique panpsychism. So what is being specified by the brain as a reconstructive wave? Well, there's two properties of the holographic field. A primary memory, as we've noted, due to the melodic, indivisible transformation of the field, and an elementary awareness, defined throughout the field. Take this at the smallest imaginable scale of time, not the scale of coffee stirrings or buzzing flies, even heron-like flies, via its holographic nature, where each point reflects the state of all other points. That is, reflects the state of the whole. For Bergson, this elementary awareness is termed in his terms pure perception. So there is no one seeing. The specification is to this, a time-scale, action-relevant form of the elementary awareness defined throughout the field. That is, the coffee being stirred, the fly, are actual forms of this elementary awareness. So there's no combination problem here. We are not trying to explain how a bunch of conscious particles combine in some mysterious way to form the perception, the experience of the coffee being stirred. The reconstructive wave dynamics, the reconstructive wave specific to an event in the holographic field, explains the image of this event. We have removed as well the homunculus, the little man inside the brain looking at the coffee cup. Or in the holographic framework, we're removing the viewer viewing the coffee cup. But to experience this reality, to truly experience it, we do need that koan. I'm convinced that the Zen Satori, at least in my opinion, is in essence the verification of Bergson's intuitive, experiential verification of Bergson's framework. So last things. Perception or experience is not occurring solely within the brain. Again, the coffee cup is being specified right where it says it is for common sense within the external field where we can act upon it. Therefore, experience cannot be solely stored there. Our being, our experience, is integrally embedded in the indivisible transformation of the holographic field. So it's inherently, or we are inherently, four-dimensional. This requires an entirely different theory of memory retrieval. This is another subject. A rough idea, I like to symbolize that four-dimensional being. There's all our experience of coffee stirring extended in the fourth dimension, which is not a spatial dimension. The invariant structure of the current event, stirring the coffee, is driving or creating a resonant wave that's being sent or driven through, shall we say, 4D being, a resonant wave. And that is key in retrieving these experiences, either as a concept or as an individual experience of coffee stirring. But as I said, this is another subject. This is the concrete dynamics, this reconstructive wave, as concrete. So not the same as an AC motor, but just to give a reference for how concrete we're talking about. This is not abstract computations. The AI framework cannot touch this, which is why it cannot touch sentience. There is much, much more to Bergson. We've only discussed parts of chapter 1 and 4 of Matter and Memory. But here we've seen the holographic foundation in perception of his theory of mind. So if we continue these elementaries, we'll see. I would just like to note, if you want to see much deeper exposition of Bergson and Gibson and the context of the problems of AI, take a look at this book.